I have completely perfected my study routine for essay-based exams, so I'm going to share with you what I am currently doing, my current workflow for the mocks that I have coming up next week. Admittedly, I should have started revising for these much earlier than I did, but I think the workflow is good enough that it should get me some great grades regardless. If you're new, I'm Erin, I'm studying land economy at Cambridge, and I'm going to take you through my 8-step process. Now, 8 steps sounds like a lot, and it kind of is, but equally you kind of need to do a lot to do well anyway, and they're generally the small steps, like they're broken up really quite into tiny pieces, so it's not as overwhelming as it might sound initially. So without further ado, the first step is for you to gather material. So you want to gather textbooks, videos, PowerPoint presentations, whatever you have, class notes that is going to have content that's going to be applied when you're assessed. So obviously you're not going to have like question and answers for an essay-based subject in the same way as you would for maths or physics or something like that, but you just want to find all of the material that you can that has relevant information for you to be tested on. And alongside that, step number 2 is you're gathering material that says what you're going to be assessed on. So it's obviously not going to be, this is going to be the essay question, but for example, you might have a course outline, you might have a specification, you might have examples of past papers. You want to grab all of them and make sure that you have all the material that you have, and you also have a bit of a specific, this is what you're going to be assessed on, this is what the course outline says, this is what the specification says. And once you've got those two, you're going to use the specification or course outline to pick out the key features from your notes. So the key points, the key things that you need to know about, if there are key words, key definitions, key diagrams, whatever it is, write a list of all of those things that you think you could be assessed on. So all of those key pointer words, write them down. Once you've done that, step number 4 is to create notes that look a little something like this. So what I've done is I've taken all of the keywords that I had picked out initially, and I've basically written a little explanation underneath it. So for example, on here I've got spatial correlation, I've got skill cells, migration implications, whatever. And you can see I've also sort of highlighted the keywords in red. That is super important because in the next step, you're going to be moving from having written these notes to blurting out and properly learning them. Now, the first time you try blurting these notes, you're hardly going to remember anything. So the way that I like to do this looks a little bit like this. I know it looks very messy, but there is order, I promise you. So I will take the title of one of these little information cells. So for example, it might have been spatial correlation. I'll write it in blue, and then in black, I will blurt out everything that I can remember from that pointer in my notes. Of course, there are going to be things initially that I don't remember, and then I put them in red. And once I've done a whole page, I'll go through, I'll look at each of the little blue bits, and I'll just check in on those bits I had written in red. Do I remember them? Do I understand why they are the case? That is really critical. Do you understand? If you don't, go back to your textbook, go back to your notes, go back to the source of your information and really try and build that understanding, because that's what makes the difference between you doing badly and you doing quite well. Once you've done your blurting, step number 7 is to try teaching. So the way that I like to do this, I like to get out my whiteboard, I like to put it on the side and blurt down everything. Try and teach it, try and explain it, and I like to do this out loud. Doing this in your head is just, for me anyway, nowhere near as beneficial as actually vocalizing the concepts, because when you talk through something, you really realize whether you understand it or not. And a fun little prompt that I like to do is just imagine that you're teaching people who are just going to constantly ask you, why is this the case? Why does this happen? And you're building chains of reasoning just like you would in an essay. So that is almost writing essays without actually having to write them. But then step number 8 is to write some essays. So you have a choice here. If you have an abundance of past papers, do past paper essay questions. If you have very few past papers, you're going to want to make your own essay questions, and then just before the exam, move on to those ones that you have in past papers. But if you have literally no idea, no past papers, not much of a real guide as to what they could be on, I want you to go back through everything and just create a bunch of essay questions. Write 10, 20 essay questions. You don't have to end up doing them all, but even the process of trying to figure out what could an essay question be will lead you to focus in on the most important parts of the content that you've just learnt. And that is one of the best ways to narrow down your revision, to make sure you're focusing on the key ideas that are most likely to come up, and hence focus you to get better grades. And that is my current revision workflow. I should probably get back to it, so I'll see you in the next video.